Let's go in depth on what's happening at the state capitol in Oklahoma City. We are a little more than 2 weeks out from the start of the 2026 legislative session. In addition to the regular work of the budget, there is a heavy appetite for education reform. Joining me on the program tonight to speak unedited about the work ahead to be done is Senate Pro Tem Lonnie Paxton. Back on the program to speak unedited just a couple of weeks before legislative session starts is Senate Pro Tem Lonnie Paxton. Thanks for coming up the Turnpike. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So let me ask you, do you have a top 3 of things you're looking at?
Top 3 is to successfully get through session. You can figure out what that is. But, I think if you're talking about, kind of what's some of the priorities, I think, of course, education will jump right to the top. I think that's probably just about everybody. You kind of look at some of our education rankings, how do we make that better? And so that's what we're working on. We have Senator Pugh, our education chair in the Senate, and Senator Seifert, our education vice chair, are working very hard to make that happen and working with our House counterparts and the governor to come up with some new solutions to make everything work well, get our rankings better, make sure our kids are ready to go into the workforce once they get out of high school. And so they're also working with the Department of Education, everybody collaboratively realizing that we have some issues we need to address. And then also, once again, we'll always look at economic development. I always say, when it comes to Oklahoma and our kids, we want to make sure we can make sure they're really do everything we can do to make sure that there are really good jobs out there. So when they get out of high school or career tech or college, that job is there waiting for them that they can jump into, and they don't need to go to another state to find a really good job. And then, of course, you look at other things that we deal with. I think one thing we're hearing from our constituents a lot is the affordability of owning a home. Property taxes, insurance costs, things like that are really seem to be climbing. And so we're looking at some issues, how to address that.
Let's stay on education for a minute. There seems to be an appetite to get something done. We can't just stay here anymore. Is there any talk in the chamber about the Oklahoma Competes plan at all? There has been talk we've heard from the House, at least even authoring a bill that kind of looks like it.
Right, and of course that's the state chambers put out a lot of information. Some of it was kind of a gut punch that we needed to hear. We needed to see what the actual numbers were out there, how we compare with other states, how we're doing as a state. There's a lot of things we can really hang our hats on saying we're doing a great job. But like 3rd grade reading proficiencies is one of those that we're having difficulty getting kind of getting traction on. So yes, the House and Senate and the governor and the Department of Ed, we're all going to work very closely together to start improving those scores.
Let's talk about, because you all left with the Department of Mental Health kind of in a holding pattern, and there has been a month. Do you feel you can get the Department of Mental Health and all of that scandal finally taken care of this session?
We've made a lot of strides since last session. Of course, at the end of last session, the legislature took the unprecedented action of, legislatively removing a department head from an agency. It's never happened before, but it was almost a unanimous vote in the Senate and the same thing in the House because something needed to be done. The governor's done a great job in putting a replacement in there and as a temporary basis until we get somebody in there on a full-time basis. But they've made lots of strides. We're seeing things that's going on. We're putting a lot of money into the Department of Mental Health. We're kind of questioning where all that money's being spent at. And so that's what we're looking at right now is things the tide has turned, the boat's pointing in the right direction. I think we continue to make lots of positive moves there.
One thing I'm concerned, and I even asked y'all about this in the summertime, was it seems like the big beautiful bill has shifted a lot of funding and program management back to the states, and there's multiple programs. I think just to put it under an umbrella, we'll call them social welfare programs.
Right.
How are you all handling this? Are you going to have to remove some people, or are you going to add work requirements, or do we just pick up the costs that the feds won't do anymore?
Right. Just picking up the costs the feds won't do anymore will be very difficult to do. That's one of those situations where it's there's just too much out there. So you look at a federal government that's running $1.5 to $2 trillion a year in debt, continuing to add to our national deficit. It's a problem. They have to fix that. So I don't have a problem with them trying to find ways to do that, pushing things back to the states. One thing the state can do, I'll just use SNAP benefits as an example. One thing we realized during the government shutdown, when they started looking at SNAP benefits, Oklahoma is one of the top 4 states in the nation in SNAP benefit percentages. Us, Louisiana, New Mexico, and Oregon are the top 4 states as a percentage of our residents that receive SNAP benefits. Why is that? So we have to start questioning that, because SNAP benefits have traditionally been, the administrative costs are half borne by the state, half by the federal government, but the program costs are 100% borne by the federal government. Part of the big beautiful bill is that if the state doesn't do a good enough job in reducing the amount of errors If the error rate is over 6%, the state has to start sharing in the actual cost of the program, which could be several $100 million if we don't get our ducks in a row and get that error rate down below that. Right now, we're at over 10% in an error rate. We have to get it below 6%, or that's going to cost us a lot of money. So some things just doing better job at program administration, whether it's in Medicaid, SNAP, or whatever any of these social programs are, because the federal government is pushing it down, but they're also not just saying we're cutting this. Some of it's they're not cutting it if you do a good job of administering it. So that's just SNAP. So we will keep looking at it and making it work. The good thing for Oklahoma is this legislature has done a good job of socking away money. We're not sitting here with bank accounts that are empty. We actually have money sitting in an account because of fluctuations that can happen in Medicaid. And so the money, several $100 million is there. So there's not a crisis at hand, because we have money that we can back up some of the problems that are coming at us, but that can't last forever. So we can't just spend that account dry and then try to figure it out. We've got to figure it out now. We've got to start doing things to make our programs run more efficient so that the neediest people are still taken care of. But if it's somebody who can take care of themselves, they need to be out there working and earning a living, and we need to make sure that those opportunities are out there for them.
What I was wondering as I was thinking about questions to ask you today is, could you have a special session for the big, beautiful bill? And it's like, no, this is a part of the budget now.
Yeah.
How expensive would you say the big, beautiful bill is? The requirements on y'all as legislators putting that budget together. Is this an expensive shift?
Yeah, there's a lot of things being pushed down onto every state. One thing about Oklahoma is we had the opportunity to apply in the area of Medicaid and some of the medical money that comes from the federal government. We had the ability to apply for some of the money that kind of goes to our rural health care and some of our health care outcomes. Oklahoma is one of the top recipients in the nation as far as the amount of money coming back to Oklahoma. So that money's coming back to us, and we will get that applied so we can try to start changing health outcomes. Oklahoma, as a state, our overall health is not in great shape. Yeah. We need to work with that and make sure we can improve that and use that money to kind of point in that direction. So there's maybe less of a need for the health care, but for people that do need it, we need to make sure that the rural hospitals stay open. And so I think we're going to be able to do that, but it is a significant shift of federal resources that are having to come back to the state.
Back on education, the governor seems to want to push for removing the cap on the child tax credit. Right. How are you feeling about removing that cap, especially with the fiscal restraints you all have?
Right. Well, so we're talking about is basically the private school credits that are out there, the educational choice credits. So we passed that. It's where kids in Oklahoma will have an opportunity to go to a private school if they choose to do so, and it provides a tax credit to the parents for those kids so they can help use that to pay their tuition. So we have a cap of $250 million on that right now. So, and that's once it hits that cap, that's all we're doing. So we're very open as the need is showing that we need to raise the cap. I'm all for raising the cap, but eliminating it altogether means we can't budget for other things, like things we just talked about, or even roads or law enforcement, anything else. If there's an uncapped expense out there that we don't know what it's going to be, that creates a problem. So I've never been a fan of removing that cap. If you go back to when I first became a legislator in 2016, we had the effects of an uncapped zero emissions tax credit, which is basically the wind turbines. That was an uncapped tax credit sitting out there. And before the legislature could come in and act, it ran out of control. We were paying hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 10 years, in excess of $1 billion. A lot of it went to foreign companies, went to companies outside the state of Oklahoma, because there was not a cap on that program. One of the first things the legislature did when I became a state senator, the 2017 session, is we eliminated that zero emissions tax credit. And they're still building the things, but they don't need a tax credit to do so. But that's what an uncapped program can do, is just lead to uncontrollable credits that we end up paying out on. So we have to be very careful with taking the cap off. Certainly raise it up as time, as the need warrants that we need to raise it up, but we will do it in a controlled manner.
Let me ask you before we go, the last night of session was very rough. There were attacks on wives. There were some members walking out like, what did I just... Is everything okay?
Everything's great. Okay. So you have to understand that it is 48 members of the Oklahoma legislature, and there's always going to be one of those 48 that maybe says something or does something that makes the news. For the most part, the Senate's a pretty quiet place. Most reporters don't like to hang out in the Senate because it's boring. They kind of refer to us as the retirement home of the Capitol sometimes, and that we actually kind of like it that way. We like to deliberate policy, not attack personalities. And that last night was a long day. It ended after midnight, and just some tensions start running raw at that point. But it's typically just one or two people that maybe said something they shouldn't have said. said, that's water under the bridge. Most of us are big enough adults to handle that and move on, and that's kind of what's happened. It wasn't that big of a deal, but it did create a little bit of a dust up. But it seemed like a big deal in the Senate because it never really happens in the Senate, and it was mainly one person that had said something on the floor, that did refer to another senator's spouse, and it was inappropriate, and I think everybody's moved on from that.
Senator, thank you so much. I'm out of time. We could talk for hours.
Absolutely.
Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
Now, you just heard from the Republican leader of the state Senate. Tomorrow we will speak unedited with Speaker of the House Kyle Hilbert about what's going on in his chamber this coming legislative session. And then we should note next week we also have Assistant House Minority Leader Melissa Provenzano to talk about what the Democrats are looking as well. We're getting them all for you just before session.